believe in invisible things. We believe in love. We sing songs about it. We write stories about it. We watch movies about it. We believe in love even though we can't smell it, we can't touch it. We know it exists from the way we respond to our children, to our friends, to everyone. We believe in love. We believe in immunity that protects our bodies even though we can't see the cells and the antibodies that make up our immune system. We believe we have immunity. But some invisible things we have difficulty with, and people are dying as a result. I want to share some ideas with you about what we might be able to do about this and how you are invisible heroes. But first, I have a question for you. Hands up if you died from a vaccine-preventable disease when you were a child. I'm really relieved to see that no one put their hands up. I would have been really worried if they had. Of course, everyone who's died from a vaccine-preventable disease is invisible to us. But so are all the lives that are saved by vaccines. So I'm going to give you some statistics. The World Health Organization estimates that 2 to 3 million lives every year are saved by vaccines. That works out as 1 life saved every 10 seconds, which means in the couple of minutes I've been talking, 10 or 12 lives have been saved. People who are alive who have no idea that they would have been dead if it weren't for vaccines. And that's entirely invisible. And this is a real problem. People are dying because of the invisibility of the lives saved. Parents are more concerned about the perceived harms from vaccines than they are aware of all the benefits. For example, just this year in Europe, the World Health Organization reported 35 deaths from measles. The last one, a 6-year-old boy who died in Italy. How can it be that children are dying from measles in Europe in the 21st century? So I have some ideas about what to do about this. And you're part of the solution. As a scientist, I was very concerned to find out that science wasn't enough in convincing parents. I had a friend who didn't get any of her kids vaccinated. And I sat down very calmly and I spoke to her about all the things that make vaccines safe. And she took no notice of it. It didn't change her mind. And she didn't change her mind until one of our other friends got really, really angry with her and said to her, "Don't you know that measles kills children?" She was furious. And then my friend changed her mind and she got her kids vaccinated. And it just goes to show that we don't make decisions in rational ways. We're human. And I don't think she was an idiot. I think she was just being human. Along those lines, just think about it. Think about your own parents. How often have your own parents made decisions that didn't seem entirely rational to you? We are all human. So science is not enough. And maybe it will help us deal with this issue a little bit if we go back in time. So if we go back in time, before the time of vaccines, we'll go back 300 years before there were vaccines. And I want to talk to you about smallpox. Now, smallpox was a terrible disease. It killed up to 30% of the people who got smallpox, more than that in children. It changed history. It spared no one, rich or poor. Royal successions were changed. The land we're living on, the land we're in right now, was completely transformed. Up to 80% of the indigenous peoples of the Americas were killed by smallpox. So going back to that time, 300 years ago, I want to talk about this woman, Lady Mary Montague. Lady Mary Montague, she was very rich. She was an aristocrat, and she knew all about smallpox. Her brother had died from smallpox, and she herself got smallpox, and she was very badly scarred. She went from being a great beauty to losing her eyelashes, and she would have thought about smallpox every time she looked in the mirror. She was the wife of the ambassador to Constantinople, which is now called Istanbul, and she went out to Istanbul, and there she found out about something called variolation. And variolation is something that predates vaccination, and it's a process that was developed originally in China And it evolved through Africa and was taken up by the Ottoman Empire, and they were using it in Constantinople when she was there to protect people from smallpox. And it involves taking a small amount of smallpox from somebody who's infected and giving it to someone else to protect them. And she thought this was amazing. So she got her own son variolated, inoculated in Turkey. And then when she came back to Britain, she had her daughter inoculated in front of the physicians of the royal court. And this is important because it changed history. It changed the history in Britain. And the royal family took up variolation, and what's more, their troops took up variolation. And that's important for Canada. If you roll forward to the American Revolution 50 years later, when during the Battle of Quebec there was a smallpox outbreak raging, the American troops were not variolated, and the British troops were. And so the American troops were defeated. They had to retreat, and in fact they lost their general to smallpox during the retreat. So perhaps Canada would not be here today if it weren't for Mary Montague. She's an invisible hero who changed the world. So roll forward a couple of decades more to 1796, and now we're getting into the vaccine era. Edward Jenner is the person who's credited with developing the smallpox vaccine. And he's also credited with saving more than 500 million lives, which is astonishing. That's more than the whole population of Canada, the US, and Mexico combined. And that means that it could be that your grandparents or great-great-grandparents, that they were alive because of vaccination, which means you're here today because of it. So it was an absolutely astonishing achievement. And we've now eradicated smallpox since 1979. And that took a lot more than just the vaccine. That took the invention, the bifurcated needle, the jet injector, freeze-drying of vaccines, the public health approach to controlling smallpox outbreaks. All of those things came together to eradicate smallpox. The lives that have been saved by this effort, the whole world coming together, have never really been properly celebrated. There's not been a single Nobel Prize awarded to any individual or any organization for this incredible achievement. That's just how invisible it is. So science is not enough, but there are some things we can possibly do about it to try and make all these lives saved more visible to all of us. And I want to tell you a couple of stories. Now, just a warning, the first one isn't about deaths, it's about things that vaccines protect us from. Because sometimes death, like the death of a child, is really unthinkable. So I want to talk about mumps, which hardly ever kills children. But it does cause some other serious complications. And one of those complications, and this is a warning to some of you in the room, this may make you feel uncomfortable. So one of the complications of mumps is about 1 in 5 boys get swollen, painful testicles. Now that's bad enough. But about half of those boys afterwards notice that their testicles are smaller than they were before they had mumps. They've shrunk. And no parent wants their child to have shrunken testicles. Now, when I tell guys this information, they get a visceral reaction, a look in their eyes that we don't get when we tell them that measles kills children. It's really interesting. It's another way in which it's unpredictable how people are going to react to things, but there you go. It's one way of making the invisible visible. Another story about making the invisible visible to communities. So this is from my hometown of London in the UK, in England. There was a school in a very deprived part of town where a lot of the children were not vaccinated. And a child in that school developed leukemia. And that child had to leave school for treatment. Luckily, they did very well, and they were going to be coming back to school, but everyone was really worried because if they did come back to school, and if there was an outbreak in that school, that child could be very seriously affected or even die. So the head of the school wrote to all of the parents and said, please make sure your children are fully vaccinated. When that child went back to school, every single child in the school was vaccinated. All the parents knew, they knew this child, that no parent wants another child to come to harm because they didn't get around to vaccinating their kids. The situation had been made visible to all of them. So there are ways in which we can make stories we can tell that make this visible. So before I get to my ideas for what we can do about this, and the ideas I want to share with you, I just have one question to ask you, and that's, how many of you think you might be here today and healthy because of vaccines? Could you put your hands up? So that's very heartwarming to see. And I think there's another way of looking at this. In fact, everyone who supports immunization is actually quietly saving lives every minute of every day, which is an astonishing thing we're doing. So what I'd like to ask you is, the next time that you go and get a vaccine, when you go and get your flu shot, when you go for your HPV vaccine, when you take your children to get their MMR vaccine, when you talk about vaccination, or if you give a vaccine, just stop for a moment and celebrate, because you are invisible heroes. Celebrate and say to yourself, I am helping to save lives. You may never know whose life you've saved. It could be your own, it could be your child's, it could be someone you never meet, it could be someone in your community. It doesn't matter. You're helping to save lives. The lives that you are helping to save, they may be as invisible as love, but they are just as real. Thank you.